had spent several months meticulously arranging this excursion. It was designated strictly for our two selves. No romantic partners, no responsibilities whatsoever. Merely a considerably overdue weekend intended for complete disengagement. We chose the most affordable cabin available to us, nestled securely within the dense, boreal fringe of some indistinct northern lake. Activities included angling, consuming beverages, and perhaps a small quantity of cannabis. It epitomized the kind of leisurely, focused respite we both privately acknowledged our desperate need for. Despite pretending otherwise, I had just resigned from my employment, suffering from severe professional burnout. Liam's marital engagement had dissolved abruptly a mere fortnight prior to the scheduled nuptials. We elected not to discuss either of these personal crises the subsequent morning. I awoke prematurely, unable to achieve restful slumber. Liam subsequently joined me on the shadowy, dockside area, both of us blurry-eyed and tightly grasping mugs, filled with exceptionally poor quality instant coffee. It was then that our attention was drawn to it, situated across the body of water, barely discernible through the encompassing mist. A dwelling, a substantial, fully formed house. It presented with 2 stories, pale exterior siding, a sharply angled roof, perfectly symmetrical in its construction, and definitively absent from that location the preceding day. Perhaps we were overly inebriated to have noticed, Liam posited. Possibly someone erected it overnight, I humorously remarked. However, the distinct chill that traversed my spinal column did not align with my jesting tone. We observed the structure for a considerable duration. It neither shifted its position, flickered in appearance, nor began to dissipate. It simply remained there, motionless and seemingly expectant. We could perceive no pier or designated pathway leading directly to it. Was simply present. Ultimately, our inherent curiosity overcame our initial apprehension. We ascended into the aged, metallic rowboat furnished by the cabin, which emitted a distinct squeaking sound with each powerful pull of the oars. The lake was entirely calm. Its surface exhibited no ripples whatsoever. Even the pervasive fog appeared dense and deliberately placed, as if it held the distinct intention of concealing something. As we traversed the water, I distinctly recall contemplating. We might be on the verge of disrupting someone's profoundly private weekend. Fog dramatically parted like a theater curtain as our proximity increased. The house rested precisely in the geographical center of the water. No docking structures, no supportive stilts, no visible means of support were evident. It was merely a 2-story colonial-style residence suspended flawlessly above its glassy reflection, appearing as though it had been digitally cut and pasted into the world. Without any logical explanation, Liam was the first person to articulate the obvious. There is no visible foundation. I nodded my agreement. There is no rational basis for it to be standing upright. We executed a full circle around the structure in the boat, but no clear point of entry presented itself, only quiescent water and the faint utterance of the wind. And then, in an almost miraculous discovery, we discerned a flat, wooden platform obscured by the shadows directly beneath the water. Situated in front of the porch steps, a surface just adequately wide enough for us to ascend onto. We secured the boat and stepped onto the platform. It did not creak, nor did it exhibit any sway. It felt impossibly solid beneath our feet. The main front door yielded with the initial twist of its knob. Inside, a profound warmth enveloped us. I do not refer solely to temperature. It conveyed the sensation of a cherished residence, as though someone had been anticipating our arrival. Lamps diffused a soft orange illumination within every room, casting their gentle glow over immaculately maintained furniture and polished hardwood floors. Fire audibly crackled within a stone hearth despite the absence of any visible external chimney. The aroma of freshly baked bread permeated the atmosphere. The dining table was formerly set for 2 individuals with full plates of food already prepared. Roast chicken, assorted vegetables, and mashed potatoes, still steaming vigorously as though they had just been readied. Our stomachs audibly rumbled in unison, but neither of us ventured to touch the meal. Perhaps this constitutes one of those eccentric theme rentals Liam suggested, likening it to a peculiar urban experience. I was too completely stunned to formulate any reply. The interior was visually stunning, far exceeding the quality of the glorified shed we had leased. We navigated from one room to another, now proceeding in absolute silence. Every bed was impeccably made, and closets were replete with clothing neutral in color, devoid of identifying labels, yet meticulously folded with evident care. Framed photographs adorned the hallways, but the faces depicted within them were impossible to discern, appearing as if smudged or captured in mid-motion, simultaneously familiar and entirely alien. Everything exuded that sensation of having once been profoundly loved, aged but spotlessly clean, utilized but deeply valued. The kitchen was fully provisioned. The refrigerator maintained a cold temperature and emitted a low hum. Cabinets were stocked with various dry goods, and even a fruit bowl rested on the counter, containing apples that appeared waxy and perfectly formed. We stood within the living room, surrounded by a profound silence and an encompassing sense of comfort. This particular dwelling is considerably superior to our rented cabin, Liam remarked. By an enormous margin, I appended. No fungal growth, no evidence of wood rot, no foul odor suggesting a deceased raccoon beneath the floorboards, I elaborated. We shared a brief laugh, but the insidious sensation began to creep over us that we were intruders. This was indisputably someone's personal space, and we were perambulating through it as if it were a public venue. We did not prolong our stay. The atmospheric conditions inside that house possessed a peculiar capacity to numb the passage of time, as if everything external to its walls simply ceased to exist. However, upon consulting my watch, nearly 2 hours had elapsed. The prepared meal on the table had not cooled in temperature. Liam emitted a low whistle. That's quite enough of this spectral real estate tour. Let us return before darkness fully descends. Indeed, I affirmed. Though my vocalization lacked conviction even to my own perception, I was disinclined to confess how profoundly the location made me feel secure, almost hypnotically so, as if departing would constitute an error of some kind. He was already positioned at the doorway. Are you accompanying me? Yes, directly behind you, I responded. He stepped out first, his boots creating a soft thudding sound on the wooden platform. That particular sound felt grounding, undeniably real. Then I attempted to follow and made direct impact with an obstruction that was not visibly present. The air had solidified, not in the manner of wind or physical resistance. It was precisely like encountering a pane of glass face first. My entire physical body jolted forcefully backward. My respiration became momentarily trapped in my throat. What the hell? I extended my hands forward. They flattened against an unyielding emptiness. The door frame was directly before me, open, yet I was unable to traverse it. It was as if the house itself was exerting a repellent force. Matt, Liam's voice drifted through the fog, noticeably muffled. I struck the barrier again, with increased force this time. I cannot exit, I exclaimed. What are you articulating? He inquired. I cannot exit. Subsequently, everything underwent an immediate transformation. Every single light source within the house simultaneously extinguished. The pervasive warmth rapidly dissipated. The fire abruptly ceased its crackling in mid-motion. In the sudden, profound silence, the sound of my own breathing filled the room, rapid, sharp, and excessively loud. The moonlight filtered through the windows in faint silver ribbons, illuminating minuscule motes of dust that had been imperceptible moments prior. Liam, my voice was barely audible. A response came, only the distant, rhythmic lapping of water against the foundation, a sound that, inexplicably, felt closer than it ought to have. Liam, I shouted, a wave of panic surging through me. My heartbeat reverberated forcefully in my ears. Footsteps resonated across the porch. Then the door swung wide open. Light poured back into the interior around him as though someone had activated a switch. The fireplace roared back to vibrant life. The air regained its warmth. Everything had returned to normal. Liam stood in the doorway, his eyebrows noticeably raised. What precisely is your difficulty? I stumbled forward, gripping the door frame tightly. I was unable to leave. I halted, fully comprehending the utter irrationality of my statement. He gazed past me, carefully surveying the brightly illuminated, comfortable room. Are you certain you didn't simply induce a panic attack in yourself? Man, you've been visibly agitated ever since our arrival. I am entirely serious, I insisted, shaking my head. It was like encountering a physical wall. He chuckled uneasily, patting my shoulder. Yes, an ominous invisible wall situated in the middle of a magical lake. Perhaps he has indulged excessively in edibles, huh? But even as he jested, I observed it, the manner in which his eyes quickly darted toward the open door behind him, then returned to meet mine. He did not vocalize it, but I could discern that he perceived it too. The external air felt heavy, the specific kind of profound stillness that seems expectant. We continued to test the phenomenon, conjecturing that it was perhaps merely an isolated incident, some peculiar sensory illusion, or possibly extreme fatigue. But the outcome was consistent. Every single time we attempted to depart together side by side, we both encountered the obstruction, an invisible wall, as if the ambient air had been completely vacuum sealed. No yielding, no sound, merely solid nothingness. The initial occasion this occurred to both of us simultaneously. We exchanged glances and remained silent. We simply retreated back into the house. Consequently, we attempted to separate our departure again. I successfully exited first, reaching the porch. He followed but was obstructed, and the precise moment I successfully crossed the threshold, the interior lights instantaneously flickered back on, becoming warm and inviting, as if nothing unusual had transpired. Then we reversed the sequence. He departed without issue. I followed but was once again obstructed. It became unequivocally clear that one could depart, but only if another individual remained behind. One must stay. I possess no understanding of the mechanism by which the house enforced this particular regulation, but it did so without fail every single time, regardless of our attempts to circumvent it. Eventually, we ceased our efforts and sat within the living room, encompassed by the rhythmic ticking of numerous clocks and the perfectly arranged furniture. The crackling fireplace did not diminish, and the meal on the table never became cold. It all remained perpetually waiting. Liam was the first person to speak. "I will depart," he stated. "I will procure assistance. I will be swift." I did not approve of this proposal. However, he was already moving toward the door. As he traversed the threshold, the light did not merely recede. It seemed to curdle. The warm, golden hue drained away into a thin, gray moonlight that coated every surface like fine dust. The fire extinguished itself without generating any smoke. The aroma of baked bread soured into something metallic and ancient. The internal temperature dropped by 5 degrees and continued its descent. I attempted to activate the lamps. Nothing occurred. Switches clicked audibly. The bulbs remained inert. I even endeavored to use the lighter from the kitchen drawer, but when I flicked it, no spark was produced. Therefore, I commenced walking. Initially, everything appeared identical, but a profound sense of age seemed to pervade the dwelling. The once pristine wooden adornments peeled and flaked into desiccated husks, only vaguely resembled their original forms. Then I opened a door that, by all logic, should have led to the hallway, and instead discovered a staircase narrow and intensely black. I did not venture downwards. I swiftly closed the door, drew a deep breath, and reopened it. The hallway had reappeared. I stood there for a considerable period, simply breathing and intently listening. The sounds manifested slowly, as if the house had been holding its breath and was finally exhaling. Soft creaking noises, then the low hum of something shifting, almost organically. Like the realignment of bony structures within the walls, there was also movement. Initially, it was confined to fleeting glimpses at the extreme edges of my vision. A shadow fleetingly passing behind a doorway I had not yet opened. Something rapidly crawling along the ceiling, fast enough to induce doubt as to whether I had genuinely observed anything at all. I turned corners that, by all architectural design, should have led to the kitchen, and instead found myself inexplicably returned to the foyer. Doors led to erroneous locations. Windows revealed only an impenetrable fog. Eventually, I relinquished my attempts to comprehend and map the internal layout. I selected a particular room, a small guest bedroom I had not previously encountered, and securely shut the door behind me. It was bitterly cold. I climbed into the bed, remaining fully clothed, clutching the thick covers tightly to my chin. I heard respiration, which was distinctly not my own, a slow, deep, rasping sound originating somewhere within the walls. I also heard scratching like nails or claws being dragged, pacing back and forth. On one occasion, something deliberately and slowly brushed against my legs beneath the covers. I remained completely motionless, holding my breath. No subsequent sound followed, only a silence so absolute that it produced a distinct buzzing sensation in my ears. I possess no memory of actually falling asleep. Must have succumbed to extreme exhaustion. I awakened hours later, my body cramped, my teeth uncontrollably chattering, my heart pounding vigorously, feeling as though I had received no rest whatsoever. The room was even darker than it had been previously, and the door through which I had entered was no longer present. A different door now existed on the opposite side of the room. I stretched stiffly, preparing to survey my surroundings, and immediately felt my stomach clench with an unbearable emptiness. I was severely starving, not merely hungry, but feeling as though some unseen entity had reached inside during the night and extracted more than just my sustenance. The lights remained extinguished. The fireplace continued to hold only cold ash. The food that had been on the table earlier was entirely gone, vanished as if it had never existed at all. I attempted to use the taps. Nothing emerged. No hissing sound, no dripping water. Just silence. The windows continued to display the lake, perpetually blanketed in motionless fog. Yet the sky remained in a state of eternal dusk. The moon hovered low, never ascending, never descending. The shadows remained elongated and stretched out. Initially, I surmised that one day had passed. Then perhaps two. Now I was utterly uncertain if time was progressing in any meaningful way. I began to keep a record. I utilized the steak knife to carve a tally mark into the kitchen table surface. Each time I managed to fall asleep. There were now 5 distinct lines, perhaps 6. One of them appeared deeper, fresher, but I could not recall having made it. The house no longer permitted me to find rest. Every single time I closed my eyes, I sensed its surveillance, not emanating from the darkness, but from everywhere. It felt as though the walls constituted its very skin and the structural beams were its spine. I could distinctly hear its breathing through the grain of the floorboards. I could smell it, a sweet, damp putrefaction, even when I pressed a pillow firmly over my face. Initially, I confined myself to a single room. Then I attempted constant movement, hoping to elude its presence. But the internal configuration refused to remain static. Doors would open to reveal dead ends. Staircases would twist unpredictably. Mirrors failed to reflect the correct version of the room, a mere facsimile of what the space was intended to be, as if the house was half guessing its own form. The most disturbing occurrences involved rooms I had no recollection of entering. I would simply blink and find myself standing in a cramped crawl space, breathing heavily. My hands scraped raw as if I had been frantically clawing at the wall surfaces. On one occasion, I awoke inside a closet, curled around a pile of clothing that did not belong to me. The entity's movements altered when my exhaustion reached its peak. It did not bang or scream. It stalked. Sometimes I would hear it just outside the closed door. Slow, deliberate steps that paused for an unnaturally prolonged duration. Once I glimpsed a distinct shape under the door crack, like something dragging its limbs, crawling flat on its belly across the hallway floor. I locked the door securely. That night, it tapped slowly and patiently on the opposite side. There's a soft tapping just beyond the wooden barrier. One evening, I discovered muddy footprints in the kitchen small, bare footprints resembling those of a child. They circled the room and then halted precisely at the base of the bed. I neither heard nor saw it, yet it had been there, mere inches from me, as I slept. At some indiscernible point, I completely lost count of the days. The initial few marks on the table were neat and straight. I even attempted to quantify time by the faint alterations in the external light, but that quickly ceased to make any sense. The sky here remained immobile. It stayed perpetually suspended in that same silver, twilight glow. I estimated I had carved 30 marks, perhaps 40, but somewhere within the temporal blur, I stopped sleeping altogether, or perhaps began sleeping without conscious awareness. I began inscribing marks directly onto the wall surface instead, simply to experience a different, rougher tactile sensation. But even the walls began to resist this. The scratches would vanish whenever I averted my gaze. On one occasion they reappeared, but positioned considerably higher, beyond my reach. The house was maintaining its own meticulous tally. I had not consumed any food for what must have been several weeks. My stomach constantly convulsed, consuming itself. No sustenance, no water. Yet I did not die. My mouth remained persistently dry, my lips severely split. My head spun violently whenever I stood up too rapidly. And yet, I would awaken the next morning, still alive, still confined here, still profoundly hungry. This was not a manifestation of kindness. It was a calculated cruelty meted out one single tick at a time. It was becoming progressively bolder. The initial instance it physically touched me. I initially believed I had merely imagined it, a cold pressure applied to the back of my neck. But then it deliberately brushed against my ankle when I concealed myself under the bed. It forcibly gripped my arm once while I slept, with sufficient strength to leave distinct finger-shaped bruises. I examined my reflection in the mirror and perceived no one standing behind me. Now I distinctly heard its breathing during the night, not merely through the walls or the doorway, but originating directly from my pillow, one particular day or whatever temporal unit that signified. I observed a figure standing just beyond the kitchen doorway. It was unmoving, simply observing me. It possessed no discernible face, merely the suggestion of one, a distinct indentation where a mouth should have been, a faint shimmer of breath where eyes might normally blink. I was unable to determine if I had descended into outright insanity, or if insanity would have constituted a more merciful outcome. Then, finally, it cornered me. I was once again running, attempting to reach the staircase that had previously led to the bedroom. It terminated abruptly in a solid wall. When I turned, it was precisely there. It did not charge aggressively at me. It simply raised one hand and pointed directly at me. The ceiling perceptibly bent around its form as though gravity itself was being drawn toward it. I retreated into a corner, trembling uncontrollably, whispering anything I could recall prayers. Desperate apologies, my own name repeated incessantly like a protective incantation. It advanced forward, drawing closer. The air temperature plummeted significantly. My breath hitched and immediately crystallized in the air. It extended its hand, its fingertips on the verge of making contact with my chest. The light suddenly snapped on, becoming warm, full, and intensely blinding. The fireplace vigorously roared back to life. The air was filled with the distinct aromas of cinnamon and freshly baked bread. I collapsed onto my knees, openly sobbing. The terrifying entity was gone. I was no longer alone. "Hey," a voice called out. I lifted my head. My friend stood framed in the doorway, backlit by the sudden, intense warmth emanating from the house. He was breathing heavily, grinning with an expression of disbelief, as though he had finally located me after a prolonged game of hide-and-seek. "Dude," he articulated, "you were completely accurate. I was physically unable to speak. My throat felt raw and severely torn. Every single inch of my body ached intensely, as if I had been physically wrung out and left to desiccate. I pushed myself upright, still remaining on my knees, my eyes gradually adjusting to the impossible luminosity. He crossed the room, steadying me by my shoulders. What in hell happened? I was absent for perhaps 2 hours. I telephoned the individual who rented us the cabin, but he possessed no clue regarding my descriptions of the house on the lake. He believed I was attempting to trick him. 2 hours. I rasped. Yes, I departed just past noon. It is not even 3 o'clock yet. That particular revelation struck me with more force than the prolonged cold ever had. I looked into the mirror and deliberately concealed my reaction to what I observed. I had not visibly aged a single day, yet I felt as though I had experienced a lifetime. I gazed at the fireplace, the plates of food perfectly reset, comforting presence of peace once again permeating the air. I had carved more than 30 marks onto the table. I had felt my mental stability stretched to its absolute limit, and yet he stated it had been only 2 hours. I did not even attempt to argue, simply closing my eyes for a brief moment. Then I turned toward him, my voice low and subdued. "Look, I need to get out of here, even if only for a short period. I haven't eaten or slept. I'm profoundly messed up, man." He frowned suddenly, an uneasy expression on his face. "I thought you stated we couldn't both depart." "No," I responded quickly. "That is not accurate. We can leave, but not simultaneously. One of us has to remain behind. Is the established rule." He hesitated. "So, if I stay, you will be perfectly fine. I will row back, gather essential supplies, perhaps communicate with someone else, and be gone for 20 minutes at the absolute maximum." His eyes flickered nervously toward the door. "Seriously," I emphasized. "You are not obligated to do anything. Just relax. Enjoy the food available here. He emitted a weak laugh in response. That is utterly insane. You comprehend that, don't you? Yes, I acknowledged, already halfway to the door. But we are managing the situation, correct? A pause followed by a reluctant nod. All right, proceed. I did not glance back. I did not check to determine if the house dimmed its illumination behind me. I simply stepped out into the fog, allowed the door to swing shut of its own accord, and walked down to the rowboat. The water gently lapped against the boat as I approached the halfway point across the lake. Already I felt the oppressive weight in my chest gradually shift, as if something was being meticulously peeled off me, layer by painful layer. I ceased rowing, turning my head. The house remained motionless on the water, perfectly centered. But the lights, they were entirely gone. The soft, golden luminosity that had once made it appear like a dream had completely vanished. Its silhouette now appeared darker than the surrounding mist. Every window was a lifeless, square void. He was now inside that place, utterly alone. I had known this outcome was inevitable. I had permitted it to happen. I released the oars, allowing the boat to drift aimlessly, and attempted to convince myself that there was still sufficient time. Perhaps he would discover a means of egress. Perhaps I was mistaken regarding the rules. Maybe, just maybe, if I waited, he would appear on the porch waving and laughing, declaring, "This place is utterly messed up, man." But I successfully managed it. I waited. I observed. The house remained perfectly still, cold, untouched by the passage of time or the presence of warmth. I completed the remainder of the journey in absolute silence. Back within the cabin, every sound felt excessively loud. The creaking of the wood, the low hum of the refrigerator, the crunch of my own footsteps, all overwhelmingly resonant after the profound silence. I had just departed. I attempted to consume food. The meal tasted like bitter ash in my mouth. Guilt forcefully eradicated any semblance of appetite. I stood by the window, watching the lake, watching the dark, ominous shape where the house patiently waited. I told myself I would return at sunrise, resting briefly for my subsequent turn back inside. Then I told myself I would go only if the lights reappeared. Every hour I checked. Nothing. I went to the dock with the boat prepared, my hand resting on the rope, but I did not untie it. I simply stood there, feeling the mist delicately curl around my ankles. And then I commenced bargaining with myself. Perhaps it was not absolutely necessary for both of us to achieve escape. Maybe he was perfectly fine. Perhaps this entire experience was merely temporary, and when I departed, the house would simply vanish and release him. Perhaps the haunting of the house exclusively targeted me and posed no threat to him. Whispered his given name once. It became caught in my throat like a sharp splinter. The guilt arrived in relentless waves, shame, intense anger, resolute denial. I punched the counter forcefully, cursing him for his lack of refusal, cursing myself for having made the request, cursing the lake, the fog, everything. Then I looked out the window one final time. Still nothing. That was the precise moment I began to deceive myself. He had now experienced the oppressive darkness. He fully understood. He would comprehend precisely what I had endured, the shifting walls, the audible breathing, the endless, not quite night. Because of that shared understanding, if I were to return, if we were to trade places again, he would inevitably abandon me there. He would be compelled to. He would realize it was the solitary method for one of us to ultimately survive. So perhaps departing now was not an act of betrayal. Perhaps it was the only means to ensure my own survival, as what I repeatedly told myself over and over, until it ceased sounding like profound cowardice and began to sound like salvation, a second chance at life. I waited until the arrival of dusk before meticulously packing my bag. 15 minutes, perhaps less, containing only clothing and my mobile phone. At the door, I hesitated, glancing back at the half-empty cabin and the lake beyond. Still no lights, only silence. I whispered, "I am sorry," though I was uncertain for whom the apology was truly intended. Then I left.